Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Prophetic News, my Pot Smoker's Bible channel news video about how current events in the news relate to the prophecy of Israel as foretold in the Book of Zion. And today's episode is going to be about George Floyd's trial, which is going on right now. And it is actually pivotal to the prophecy of Israel, because George Floyd's death is prophetic. The third chapter of the book of Isaiah demands, "How dare you grind the faces of the poor?" His exact words. Grinding of the face of the poor is exactly what happened to George Floyd. His face was ground into the pavement by Chavez. And Chavez is described in detail in his uniform in Daniel. It talks about his badge and his utility belt and his gun and his baton. It's all there. And God says in that third chapter of Isaiah that he will enter into judgment. How dare you grind the faces of the poor? Judgment Day is here. It's now. And George Floyd is the central figure in the prophetic judgment that God has laid down. Now, that is not to say that the jury is going to find Chavez guilty. He is guilty as hell. That is what God says. How dare you grind the faces of the poor? That is exactly what Chavez did. And God is so opposed to that. How dare you? How dare you dress up in your fancy little fucking uniform with your belt that has all those utilities on it and that stick that you use to hit people with, and your gun. Let's not forget your gun that you use to kill my people. God's done with America. God's done with white supremacists. God's done with money. All of which contributed to George Floyd's death. All of which is laid out in the prophecy of Israel, as foretold in the Book of Zion, which can be video viewed on this channel. I'm sorry it's an unpublished manuscript at this point, but it lays out in great detail the year 2020 and the pivotal events. It talks about President Donald Trump, the basest of men, who's in power at the time of a great consumption, which is decreed upon the face of the earth, COVID-19, where everyone scurries back to their homelands and hides, leaving the streets barren, and how righteousness rises up at that moment as a protest in the streets against the cruel death of George Floyd, which just happens to coincide with the anniversary of my judgment, when I got up in front of a judge and read from the book of Isaiah and foretold these events and went to prison for it, which is exactly what the prophecy predicted that I would do. So, by fulfilling the prophecy of Israel as the Zion of the Most High God of Israel, I set in motion the events that have unfolded. If I had not given myself to God to be his servant, to save humanity with his help, we would not be here today. I do not know the fate that we would face. But thankfully, with the sacrifice of George Floyd, we are set free. Like I said, it does not matter what human judgment is laid out, because humans don't matter at this point. humanity matters at this point. And the prophecy foretells that God himself is the judge in George Floyd's case. And God is affronted by the white man, the powerful, rich, corporate white man with their badges and their batons. And it foretells that these are the people that ritually bow down to an idol in the form of a cross and justify themselves by it. Well, God's answer to that is, let your companies save you, because God won't. So Chavez, by God's judgment, is guilty. How could there be any other judgment in God's eyes when he is affronted? How dare you kill George Floyd by forcing his face into the ground for 9 minutes and 29 seconds? How dare you, white supremacist piece of shit, justify that? You can't. Because God himself has already ordained that you're guilty as hell. So, let it be known, anyone who seeks to justify Chavez for any reason will suffer the same fate that he suffers. You will end up in hell. And by hell, I mean a day, not a place. That's a theory I have anyway. But the point of the story is, God himself has already judged George Floyd's innocence and Chavez's guilt. It's in the book of Isaiah. It's in the book of Daniel. It's in the prophecy of the Old Testament. Because George Floyd is a prophetic figure. His death is the foundation upon which the nation of Zion arises. It is his death that galvanizes my beautiful rainbow children to take to the streets in defiance of the white supremacist government, the corporate government that subjects them to oppression in the name of greed. No more. No more. The moment Black Lives Matter rose up, the future was set. There is nothing that the white man can do about it. And by white man, of course, I mean the rich and wealthy 1%ers that run the corporations that they're so condemned by, because the tables have turned. God has spoken. George Floyd was innocent. And according to Isaiah, it was his use of drugs that made him innocent. Because it is the war on drugs that is the great evil of our age. And God has judged that too. And he sides with George Floyd. He sides with me. He sides with you if you do drugs. Or if you have a family member who uses drugs and you love them, despite the propaganda that tries to turn you against your own flesh and blood for the state's benefit. No more. God has spoken. Right here. Read the book of Isaiah. It foretells Black Lives Matter, Donald Trump, COVID-19, and Chavez's guilt. Guilty not by man's judgment, because men are corrupt, evil things that should be put in their rightful place. Which is what George Floyd's death is doing. Because it is exposing the true hypocrisy of America. There is no freedom in America unless you have $1 million. If you've got $1 million, you're as free as you can be. But if you don't have $1 million, you're an oppressed person. Forced to labor for those who have $1 million more. No more. We do not have to take this. God has shown us the way. All us hippies, pot smokers, drug users, poor, oppressed people. We are the true power of America. We are the bedrock of this nation. We do the actual things that need to be done. The rich people with $1 million or more, they do nothing but sit behind desks and gather all the wealth. For nothing. Money for nothing and checks for free. That talks about the guilty of this world. But it is the labor of the individuals like you and me that actually operates this nation. And all we have to do to end corporate America is to walk away from our jobs. Without us doing the actual things that actually have to be done to make society operate, they got nothing. Their dollar bills are worth crap if we don't toil at their expense or for their benefit. George Floyd is the beginning of the end of America. The foundation upon which the nation of Zion is built, and the sledgehammer that destroys the United States of America. And I predict that they're going to try to find him innocent. And their affront to justice is going to end them. But even if they find him guilty and throw his ass in prison where he belongs, this country will still go down. Because those who back him and his white supremacy ways are going to be the ones coming into the street demanding justice for Chavez. Or the next cop that kills the next black man. Because if they find Chavez innocent, it will be a license to kill blacks in the police force. And at that point, my people will rise up. And the minute we decide that we've had enough with corporate America, we can just walk away. Now, the prophecy says that we need to go camping. We need to create an Exodus event like that of Moses and Israel when it left Egypt. So I am advocating for a 420 Camp Out for Freedom. On 420, whether it be this year, next year, or 5 years from now, I don't care what year it is, but the sooner the better. We just pack our bags, everything we own. We take all of our relatives that are willing to go with us, and we meet in York, Nebraska, where I-80 and Interstate 80 meet. That's a good place to start because we can go out west to the Panhandle of Nebraska where the land is open and nobody's there. Where the sand meets the land at the edge of the Ogallala Aquifer. We will have everything that we need to provide for ourselves for the foreseeable future. We can go on strike like Israel, like India did. But instead of being in the streets like we were last year, when there was nothing but disruption and violence, we gather ourselves together in one place. We put the vulnerable in the middle. We surround them with all those who know how to fight. And we force the corporate American government to deal with this en masse as one people. And we demand an end to the injustice, not only for George Floyd's death and the deaths of Breonna Taylor and all of the other blacks that have been killed, for all of the drug users who are in prisons. 90% of the prison population is said to be drug users. I think. Don't quote me on that. But way too many. We need our freedom. So may the Grey watch over you, guide you, protect you, keep you from all harm. May they teach you right from wrong, and may you be worthy of them. May your thoughts, words, and deeds reflect truth, good, and light, the unicorn way, my way. Find your joy and pursue it, and make that your guilt choice when we do our exodus to Zion at 420. Let's go camping. Love you too much to say goodbye. If you use drugs, you have every right and reason to. Believe me, I know. I wrote 2 books of prophecy about it. Later, I'll never say goodbye.